This is Behind the Curtain. Today we're going to be learning what script technique Greta Gerwig learned from playwrights, how Greta snuck extra scenes into her film, and in her opinion, what the most difficult part of writing is.
I don't remember a time when I didn't know who Jo March was. She's always been with me. So I read it and I read it again multiple times when I was young. And then I hadn't read it until I was around 30. There was a 15-year, I read it until I was like 15 or so, and then I didn't read it for 15 years, and I read it again, and I couldn't believe how modern and strange and urgent it was.
And I'm so sick of people saying that love is just all a woman is fit for. I'm so sick of it. But I'm so lonely.
I mean, I would say the biggest part was how much this book was my book as I was growing up, and how much this book was the thing that really gave me any idea that I would be able to write at some point. And I wanted to kind of reverse engineer the movie so that the last thing that you saw is that girl getting her book. Because to me, that's the image that in cinema isn't usually associated with, the kind of visceral satisfaction of a kiss, but it could be, and it should be, that it's not girl gets boy, it's girl gets book.
The truth is, it is these two different timelines, and people sometimes say, oh, it goes back in time. But actually, the way it's structured is there's just two different origin points of the story, but everything moves forward. So one starts in 1868 and everything moves forward, and one starts in 1861 and everything moves forward. So you're never jumping back within a timeline, you're only moving forward.
And I wanted the sort of interplay of the time to be clear so you can follow it, but also in a way to create this sense of everything's happening all at once. The biggest moment for me was the Beth's death, and Beth getting sick, and this sort of parallel, these time periods. It's all moving into one, and in these two realities, in this one she comes out alive, and in this one she doesn't. And I always thought that was the starkest contrast too between the magic of girlhood and the reality of adulthood. To be totally honest, there's sort of a narrative issue in the book when you try to make it into a movie, which is if a character gets sick and then gets better and then gets sick and then dies, it's a bit of a hat trick to make it work. So I was like, okay, well, I want to do this because it felt like it also gave it this thing that people intuitively have when someone dies, which is that I've said it, I've heard other people say it. They say, but I just saw them. I just saw him. And it's almost as if this kind of as if presence could inoculate you from death. And cinema is one of the art forms where you can literally have those two moments live next to each other, because that's how it feels in life, even though that's not how linear time works, unfortunately.
Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents.
So dreadful being poor.
It's not fair.
I wanted to almost treat the dialogue from the book the way you treat Shakespeare. You don't change it. You're not changing it to suit our modern ears. You find the way that it's modern. You find the thing that is universal. So many of these lines are so famous, and they're embroidered on cushions, and they can have a sort of a mustiness to them. And I just all of a sudden heard all these lines. I was like, what if they said them like at the speed of life, the way girls talk, the way sisters are. And they're saying the lines, but it's the first time anybody's ever said them. And so they're coming out so quickly. So a lot of it was actually in the delivery. And I orchestrated the delivery by, it's a specific device that playwrights use a lot. Carol Churchill uses it. Tony Kushner uses it. This device of the slash to indicate overlap. Sort of don't make, and then there's a slash fun, and then Laurie's I'm not. So the word that overlaps is fun and I'm. So don't make I'm not. That's sort of the way it's supposed to sound. It's something that
I find really useful, because if you want to specifically hear certain words, but you like a controlled cacophony, it's very helpful, because it allows me to, especially with the group scenes, treat all the actors like an orchestra.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas. How are my girls?
So hungry. This breakfast.
I could eat a horse.
Don't say that, Joe.
I mean, when I grew up with the book, I loved the book, but I actually never really dug into who the person who had written it was. It wasn't something I thought about, because I don't know. I think that's the way children approach fiction, or approach most things. The person behind the thing is not interesting. With Louisa, I started reading other things she's written, and then I started getting into her letters and her diaries. And what I found was this just incredibly fascinating, complex woman who was both an artist and a businesswoman. And I thought that was worth exploring and playing with narratively.
You know, the text is not it's not first person. It's not Joe narrating it. It's Louisa. And there's a lot of sadness in that person behind the people. And this perspective of, you know, Louisa's real sister is already gone. Her sister Elizabeth died, and Louisa herself had gone to the Civil War as a Civil War nurse and had suffered through typhoid fever and almost died. And her sister, not Meg, but the character Meg is based on, she'd gotten married, and it was devastating for her. And so there's all these things of like, she is writing about a thing that already passed. I knew that the adaptation I wanted to do was not just an adaptation of the text as it is in the book, although I did rely heavily on the text in the book. I also wanted to treat all adaptations as almost an text, as a collective memory of what Little Women is. And I do think that there's this sense of an text or a collective text, which it means more than even what the original text said. So what I wanted to do was kind of find a way for that to be almost like the found materials, and then to explode it and deconstruct it and put it back together again.
I don't outline. I mean, I say that I definitely don't outline before I start writing. There is a moment when I do outline, but it's only after I have a great deal of material. I find when I outline before I write, it's the fastest way to kill all my ideas. I can't, somehow it makes everything quite literal for me.
Look at me. I'm homely and I'm awkward and I'm odd. Joe. And you'd be ashamed of me.
I love you, Joe.
And we would quarrel because we can't help it even now.
I feel like it's more true in movies than any other medium that the person you see them with first is the person you believe they should be with. I don't know why it works like that. I just think it tends to work like that. And so one thing when you tell the story straight through is that, you see Laurie and Joe together. And when it's like Laurie and Amy, you're like, what the hell is this? I've been with these other people. The second thing is then when you meet Professor Bear, you're like, and who's this guy? Like, I don't know this guy. I don't care about this guy. Like, who cares? So in a way, I mean, that's just nuts and boltsy. I was like, if I see Amy run into Laurie first, and obviously he's the object of her affection, and if I see Professor Bear at the beginning, then I'm less introducing a new person later. With just the briefest outline of this is a romantic interest, that you're like, oh yes, I see it is a romantic interest. Like, part of it is playing with narrative expectations. The first scene of the movie when she's trying to tell this scandal story, and he says, if the main character is a girl, make sure she ends up married or dead, either way. And then the very first scene you see her in, it's like, well, that's there you go. There's the guy. We just set up guys because it's like, he just told her married or dead. So now we have to see, is it married or dead? It's like putting a gun on the wall in the first act.
Yeah.
Talent isn't genius, and no amount of energy can make it so. I want to be great or nothing.
I mean, the truth is about the character of Amy, she was one of the characters that I just kept underlining her lines in the book. I mean, she has a line, the world is hard on ambitious girls. And she has the line, I want to be great or nothing about her art. And she's just wonderful. And I thought, when I was reading it again, I was like, oh my God, Amy's so much better than I'd ever given her credit for. And it made me realize too, what an interesting diagnosis of our culture that the character who says most clearly what she wants is the one we hated for so long.
Okay, so the line, I've always known I would marry rich, that's from the text. She does say that. And later she feels sort of embarrassed about actually having said that. But this speech, actually, for the most part, it comes from a conversation I had with Meryl Streep about this movie, which she essentially said to me, the thing that you have to make the audience understand is it's not just that women couldn't vote. It's not just that they couldn't own property. They couldn't. It's that they didn't own anything and that they legally couldn't unless they were, completely unmarried and had their own fortune. But even then it was complicated. They couldn't get educated. And so she was sort of laying out these limitations. And I knew I wanted Amy to have a speech like this, but actually this particular speech I wrote 10 minutes before we shot. In the run up to making the movie, what often happens is, you end up having to cut a lot of stuff to make page count seem lower because you're trying to be like, this isn't unwieldy. This is completely reasonable to make. So you end up like cutting so much stuff. And what I was doing was I cut the script down, but then I would just save the pages I wanted to make. And then right before we go, I just give them to the actors and I'd say, all right, we're going to do this. Hearing Amy say, I want to marry rich sounds quite crass if you don't really understand the stakes of what that means. Yeah. For women at that time, it was the decision. And if you married the wrong person, if you married someone who had a drinking problem or couldn't make a living or treated your children badly, that's it. That's the worst decision you could make. So in any case, I wanted to give her context.
When did you become so wise?
I always have been. You were just too busy noticing my faults.
Which were never there, of course.
I don't give myself a page count because I actually have no problem generating pages. Pages are pretty easy to generate. The real hard work of writing is the real hard work of anything, which is the thinking. Because you can have 50 bad ideas. It doesn't matter. You have to have the thing that kind of lynches them together. And I find that it's most similar to me like that feeling when you're staring at a math problem, like, I don't know, in like pre-calculus or something, and you just like cannot, it's like you cannot understand it. It is beyond you. But it's that cognitive struggle. And then if you put the time in, it does break. Something breaks and you're like, oh, I get it. That's the thing about writing. It's about sitting with the problem.
Hi, this is Nehemiah Jordan, the creator of Behind the Curtain. I have so many videos lined up that are coming in the next couple of weeks, as well as a bigger project that I will be announcing soon. Go and subscribe so you don't miss anything. I'll see you next week as we take another look behind the curtain.